Last Saturday, we were talking about the Sadharana Dharmas, universal ethical principles that apply to one and all, irrespective of time or place, regardless of one's social position or stage in life. We already went through two lists of these Sadharana Dharmas. One was taken from one of the important Smritis, and the other was from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The first one was fairly detailed. You may remember that we had about 9 virtues grouped under 3 classes: physical, verbal, and mental. Just for the sake of recapitulation, physical righteousness consists of charity, helping those in distress, and social service. Verbal righteousness consists of truthfulness, speaking what is good for others, and doing it gently. Okay? Gentleness of speech. And mental righteousness consists of kindness, detachment, and a reverence for sacred things. So these were the qualities listed in the Smritis. Patanjali's list is quite familiar to most of us. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, and Aparigraha. Non-injury, truthfulness, abstention from theft, chastity, and non-attachment to material things. These virtues, those belonging to Patanjali's list, however, are more applicable to spiritual aspirants seeking moksha. But now, if we want to know what are the cardinal or the fundamental virtues according to Hinduism in general, a very simple answer would be they are the qualities that the heroes of Ramayana and Mahabharata or Bhagavata, Rama and Krishna, and their devotees, the qualities that these great characters demonstrated in their lives, they are regarded as the cardinal virtues of Hinduism in general. What are they? Now you will see a slight overlap. In this list we have purity, first of all. Purity followed by self-control, detachment, truth, and non-violence. Here we have detachment, truth, and non-violence, that is non-injury, all three of which find a place also in Patanjali's list. So these are the 5 basic virtues that stand out as Sadharana Dharmas in Hinduism. They are in fact the distinctive marks of the religious spirit of the Vedas. So let us study them briefly. What exactly do we mean by purity? What all does it include? As you can guess, It includes both purity of body and purity of mind. All the cleaning, washing, and bathing, which are part and parcel of religious ceremony, and all the elaborate rules regarding food and drink, they're all meant to suggest, to remind one of purity of mind and heart. We may wonder why there should be any rules at all for such simple, natural things like eating and drinking. How is spirituality concerned with these? The thing is, spirituality is not a separate activity of life. It is an influence that ought to pervade all our activities, all departments of life. If our aim is to make our souls perfect, if we want to become one with God at the end of our lives, then anything that obstructs or checks the growth of the soul should be carefully eliminated, removed. This body and mind are the means, they are the instruments by which we practice dharma and attain that goal. The body happens to be the physical basis of the Atman, so to say. The Atman, the individual soul, resides in this physical body. And our food and drink sustain that physical basis. So our food habits are not such unimportant things as we sometimes imagine. It is directly related to the attainment of our goal. It can't be a matter of indifference for spiritual aspirants what they eat and drink. Just look at how Sri Ramakrishna trained his young disciples, how exacting, how demanding he was in matters of food and drink, sleep, and the company that his young disciples kept. So, within certain limits, of course, it is quite necessary that there should be some general rules in these matters. Even in the Gita, we read that food and drink do affect the body and mind. We find Krishna giving some general rules. He says, those who want to increase sattva, should eat foods that promote long life, vitality, strength, and health. They should eat foods that increase happiness and mental cheerfulness. Foods that are soft, sweet, substantial, that means nourishing. Foods that are nourishing and also agreeable. Rajasic and tamasic foods have to be carefully avoided. But of course, we must take care not to overdo these things. These guidelines on cleanliness and food should not be allowed to become hard and fast rules. Otherwise, they might make spiritual life mechanical. We must not stop with the mere external purity. External or physical purity is only intended to lead to internal, spiritual purity, purity of the mind and heart. Mere outer cleanliness without inner purity is worse than useless. There are hundreds of songs that the saints and mystics of India have composed where they have compared outer cleanliness unaccompanied by a corresponding inner purity is compared to decorating a corpse, nothing more. A higher form of practice, of this practice of purity, is chastity or continence. It is very highly extolled in the Shastras. It means abstaining from all forms of lewdness or grossness, coarseness in thought, speech, and action. This is important through any of the sense organs. None of our sense organs must be allowed to indulge in uh, purity of any kind, impurity of any kind. As spiritual seekers, we must always try our best to keep the body and the heart unstained, because the body is said to be God's temple. And the heart, if the body is the temple, then the heart can only be its inner shrine. Now, every basic virtue comprises a number of similar qualities. We may call them subsidiary virtues. Purity of mind, for example, implies having clean thoughts, being simple and straightforward, being frank, being innocent, and being free from the 6 enemies of spiritual life: kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, matsara. Freedom from lust, anger, greed, delusion, pride, and envy. Similarly, our next cardinal virtue, self-control. Self-control also includes similar qualities like patience, forbearance, modesty, humility, self-effacement, and self-sacrifice. They may all sound synonymous, but they have their own definite connotations. For instance, self-effacement is a passive quality. You only keep yourself in the background. You don't push yourself to the front. But self-sacrifice is something active. You actively do something to sacrifice your lower self. Anyhow, in the main, this second cardinal virtue of self-control means, again, control of the body and mind, restraint of the body and mind, subduing the flesh, so that the spirit inside may bloom. As we already heard in the last class, there are physical sins and mental sins, and both have to be rooted out. The former, physical sins, are gross: overindulgence in different kinds of sense pleasure, excessive enjoyment of gross sensuality, which attack people in all their nakedness. Their animal nature is quite easily seen. But the latter, that is, sins of the mind and heart, they are very subtle. Sometimes they even appear like virtues before they attack us. Hypocrisy, pride, arrogance, self-conceit, narrow-mindedness. This can be easily mistaken for virtues if we are not careful. If we are, most superficial people do mistake them for virtues. Generally speaking, it is rough, unrefined, uncultured people that fall prey to the sins of the flesh. Whereas Cultured people are prey to the sins of the mind. So, self control means restraint of both body and mind, restraint of both desires and emotions or feelings. The Bhagavad Gita points out how desire resides in the senses, in the mind, and in the understanding. The exact phrase that Krishna uses is desire has its seat in the senses, the mind, and the understanding. That is the home of desire, these three. And sitting there, desire, what desire does is poison all these three. Sitting there, it poisons the senses, the mind, and the intelligence, and wields right knowledge, and in the end, traps the soul in a net of delusion. So Krishna says, the enemy of desire has to be fought on all these fields before he can be vanquished, before he can be conquered. Krishna warns, control your senses at the outset and slay the destroyer of knowledge and realization. These are the strong words that he uses. Slay this destroyer of knowledge and realization. And control your senses at the outset. This is important, at the outset, because usually if you don't do this, it will be too late. It brings to mind the not so funny story of the Arab and his camel. Many of you may have already heard this story. The camel just wanted to push its nose through the door of the Arab's tent because it was so cold outside in the desert at night. The Arab didn't really want this, but the camel pleaded, "My master, I'm only just putting my nose into your room for a moment, nothing more." But in fact, it slowly pushed its whole ugly body inside. And when the owner objected to its presence in his room, it said, "What? Whose tent? If you don't like my presence, then you had better get out of my house. I'm not going anywhere." So if we are careless, this is how the story will end. When one has acquired these two virtues, purity and self-control, not only acquired, as Shankaracharya would say, when one is established in them, then one becomes, to say it in the language of the Gita, a Vishuddhatma and a Vijitatma. That is, one who has purified oneself and conquered oneself. To some, this term, self-conquest, may suggest asceticism. Asceticism of a particularly negative kind. And they have reservations about that. But let us examine whether self-conquest and asceticism, that is, the right kind of asceticism, let us examine whether they are the same. Self-control, self-discipline, self-conquest. These become asceticism only when they are carried beyond certain limits. Many people think religion glorifies asceticism, that it wants its followers to suppress the flesh altogether. At least Hinduism does nothing of the kind. On the contrary, it recognizes that the body is a dharma sadhana. We already um, heard about this in the last class. The body is an instrument of dharma. Accordingly, religion only seeks to regulate the body's appetites and cravings. The flesh is not suppressed. It is only taught its correct place. Because a person who pampers the body, who is too soft on his body, will slowly become soft himself. He will become unfit for the kingdom of the spirit. Hinduism actually takes into account all, all three factors of the human personality: body, mind, and spirit. What it does is prescribe a graded discipline for the various stages of a person's career, various stages of our spiritual journey. So Hinduism lays down a graded course of spiritual practices. It lays down specific rules for specific ashramas, what are known as stages of life. Those of the brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa. The student, the householder, the recluse or the retired person of today, and the monastic. In fact, the householder is actually encouraged to acquire wealth to gratify their legitimate desires within the bounds of dharma, and also side by side practice righteousness, be virtuous, and to work for salvation. This is the famous Hindu formula of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. It indicates the ideal of a complete life. It is only by slow degrees that a soul has to be withdrawn from the desires of the flesh. Nothing is going to happen overnight. The goal of complete restraint, complete self-mastery is reached only in the very final stage. But there is no doubt that austerity and asceticism, that is, tapas does give us the power to curb our lower impulses, tendencies towards over-enjoyment. Tapas does prepare us for higher spiritual life. It is only at the hands of fake yogis that austerity degenerates into torture of the body. And this torture of the body is usually mistakenly associated with self-mastery or self-conquest. So I repeat, self-conquest is glorified not for its own sake, but for the ultimate liberation of the spirit from its slavery to the flesh. That is the goal of tapas. At the same time, we should also not be so averse to the word asceticism. Let us not be afraid of it. All the great personalities in the realm of religion and spirituality, saints and sages and mystics, they've all been ascetics. From the Vedic rishis, through Buddha, Christ, and down to Gandhi, They've all been ascetics. And Hindus especially, they are ardent admirers of sannyasa. They may not all of them be able to live up to the ideal of an all-renouncing monk. That is a different matter. That is, nor is it expected of a common man. But still, they are all ardent admirers of the institution of monasticism. They see its worth, they can appreciate its worth instinctively. Anyhow, let me now summarize the deeper meaning of self-control. Ordinarily, our sense organs are inclined towards material things. We employ our senses to seek what we think is pleasant. But this tendency should be controlled if we want to create within us a certain level of inner calmness. Because without this minimum of inner calmness, we can't go on with our spiritual exercises. Without a certain level of inner calmness, deep spiritual truths cannot be grasped. But this doesn't mean weakening the sense organs. That is an entirely different thing. The Kathopanishad explains it beautifully through the illustration of the body chariot. The body is compared to a chariot. The soul, that is, the antaratma, the soul is its master. The intelligence is an aspect, a function of the mind. It is the power of, it is the mind's power of discrimination. And this intelligence is the driver. The mind itself, with its different functions, is the reins. The sense organs are the horses, and the sense objects towards which the horses run, they are the roads, they are the objects. What is the purpose of the chariot? Obviously, the purpose of the chariot is to take its master to his destination safely and as comfortably as possible. This purpose can only be served if the chariot is well built, if it is strong and sturdy. If the driver can tell the right road from the wrong, that is the intelligence. If the reins are strong, if the horses are firmly controlled, and if the roads are well chosen. The chariot should be well built, the driver should be sensible, the reins have to be strong, the horses have to be properly controlled, and the roads have to be chosen well, judiciously. In exactly the same way, we spiritual seekers should have a healthy body, a strong, vigorous body with vigorous sense organs. Nayamatma balahinena labhyaha. This is what the Vedas, the Upanishads say. This Atman cannot be attained by a weak person, by a weakling. And in addition to a healthy body and vigorous sense organs, a sharp sense of judgment, and a strong mind. Our judgment should guide the senses to choose only those things that are helpful to the realization of our spiritual goal. If the body or the mind or any of the senses is injured, if any of them is weakened, I'm not saying weak, weakened. If we weaken them, we won't be able to attain the goal, just as the rider can't reach his destination if the chariot and the rest are not in good condition. So the two things that are important in the practice of self-control, the two important things are the sense of discrimination and a strong willpower. But we must also have one last additional thing, that is a sense of proportion. I already said that these things should not be overdone. We must have the wisdom and the maturity to know first where we stand and how far we can go in this present stage of ours. We may remember that both Krishna and Buddha recommended the middle path, which makes one temperate, moderate in one's food and recreation, moderate in one's exertions in work, moderate in sleeping and waking. So, self-control, discrimination, willpower, and a sense of proportion. Now, after purity and self-control, the third cardinal virtue is on our list, detachment. What does detachment really mean? What does it imply? Detachment is freedom from attachments, freedom from earthly ties. We are all generally attached to our possessions, family, friends and relations, attached to our jobs, no less to our ideas and opinions, but this will come later. In fact, we are attached to everything that we call our own. Naturally, these attachments are very strong in early life. It is the first shock of separation, the shock of death, that opens our eyes to the ephemeral or the transient nature of these earthly ties. When calamities befall us, we react in three ways. Undisciplined minds are thrown off balance. People curse their fate, some curse the gods, and some are just crushed by grief. This is because they haven't thought about the conditions or the tenure, the length of life. Life is like that. When things are going as we wish, then we don't. Then we forget these things. That our life is on a lease. We forget this. We don't know. And when unfortunate things happen, we don't remember that these are the conditions of life. This is how it is. So we don't reflect on the fact that we are all creatures of time. We and the objects of our love are no more than pieces of wood that drift together for a short time on the river of life. We make a big story of our so-called love. But the fact is that we come together only for a while and then part probably forever. So the objects of our love are given to us. If I have a spiritual outlook on life, this is how I should be looking at this. The objects of our love are given to us so that they may be utilized for the finer issues of the soul. We learn from these things. Swami Vivekananda compared this world to a school or to a fitness center. We come here to learn, to make ourselves strong, but not to stay here. We learn our lessons. Then the world has served its purpose for us, and then we move on. Every day we see misers cut off from their hoards of wealth. Every day we hear of tyrants thrown out of their positions of power. And every day we see people being separated from their nearest and dearest. Death casts a shadow on all our pleasures and merriments, on all our little joys and happinesses. But when this comes to an end, someday or other, we people weep and wail and when they encounter these so-called evils of life. The second reaction is to have some courage, to be a little brave and try to endure them stoically. Yeah, when you're stoic, you don't show what you're feeling, and probably you also accept whatever happens to you, maybe in a resigned way. But it is only a spiritual person who will know how to meet these ills of life maturely and wisely in spiritual way. One oft-quoted example is that of the ideal king, Janaka. Janaka calmly faced his calamity. When he was brought the news that his capital city, Mithila, was on fire, he just said, Mithila is burning, but nothing that is mine perishes there. It is not that being a king he was indifferent. He was a real jnani who could see things as they were, who knew the true nature of things. So complete was his detachment from his sense of kingship. On almost every page of the Bhagavad Gita, we read that we should give up all earthly ties. Renunciation, renunciation. As Sri Ramakrishna said, the gist of the Bhagavad Gita is what you get when you reverse that word. Tagi. Tagi means renounce, tyaga, tyaga. If we want to know the bliss of God, the renunciation and detachment are the only ways. The word that is used in the Bhagavad Gita for earthly attachment is Sangha. So Sangha has to give place to yoga, which is union with God. And yoga, by the way, means yoga with God and viyoga, detachment from the world. Sangha is the source of all our unhappiness, and yoga is our only guarantee of everlasting happiness. Sangha is the source of unhappiness, yoga is the guarantee of undying happiness. Now, what we call renunciation is an extension, or rather, a higher dimension of detachment. Many people find renunciation a strong expression, but that is how it is. It is a purely spiritual discipline meant for self-realization and liberation through that self-realization. A good example of it is, yes, this institution of sannyasa, sannyasa ashrama. A monk takes the vow, he accepts the vow of renouncing willingly, voluntarily, not out of any kind of compulsion from outside. He chooses to renounce all enjoyment for the sake of liberation through self-realization. So, renunciation is something, in a manner of saying, something higher than mere non-attachment or detachment. We can understand detachment from material possessions being a virtue. But it is difficult to understand how detachment from human relations could be a virtue. This is why many people think sannyasis are heartless people. But we'll come to that later. The general understanding is that our human relations should be valued. For that matter, we are taught to regard them as sacred. We are supposed to look upon especially our familial affections as sacrosanct, that is, inviolable. It is true, it's quite so, but even they are not ends in themselves. No religion will say this. In his famous discourse in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find sage Yajnavalkya telling his wife Maitreyi. Yajnavalkya was a rishi and Maitreyi was no less. She was qualified to be one. The husband tells the wife, "Verily, my dear, it is not for the love of the husband that the husband is dear, but it is for the love of the Atman that is in the husband that the husband is dear. Verily, my dear, it is not for the love of the wife that the wife is dear. It is for the love of the Atman that is in the wife that the wife is dear." So, even our sacred familial affections are not, are not ends in themselves. The meaning is, the real attraction of things for a human being is the attraction of the spirit for the spirit, which is the indwelling essence of all. We don't see this because we are still ignorant of these matters. Without that spirit, our bodies are nothing but dead matter. And Swamiji says, Swami Vivekananda, dead matter cannot attract dead matter. It is because of our ignorance of this real source of attraction that we turn selfless, pure love into selfish love. It all becomes related to bodies. So the pure love that our heart learns in the family circle, in the early stage of our life, that should be gradually extended to include all living beings. So a sannyasi or a monk is not one who has divested himself of all love. That's a wrong way of looking at a monk. He is one who has, a good monk, an ideal monk. He is one who has extended his love to all and looks upon the whole world as his family. The Bhagavad Gita says, he is the supreme yogi who looks on the pleasure and pain of all beings as he looks upon them in himself. He is the supreme yogi who looks on the pleasure and pain of all beings as he looks on them in himself. This verse is, you may think of it as the golden rule of Hinduism. You know what the golden rule is. It is the principle of treating others as you want to be treated yourself. It's a maxim that is found in all religions and cultures. Treat others as you would like others to treat you. And Vedanta takes it much further when it says, you have to treat others like the way you wish to be treated by them, because you and the other are essentially non-different. You are the other and the other is you. The fact is, till we look upon our dearest ones as only parts of a vaster whole, not as our relations, this I, me and mine should not come into play. If we are able to look upon our friends and relatives as parts of a vaster whole as we ourselves are, until we are able to do this, our love and affection will never be free from the stain of selfishness. We can never become selfless in the true sense. Friends will come and go, but friendship remains forever. This is very important. Death will take away those whom we dearly love. If death doesn't take them away, we ourselves may die. We ourselves may be separated from our dear ones. But that should not take away love from our hearts. That is the meaning when the scriptures say friendship is more real than friends. Love is more real than the beloved. Love, friendship, sympathy, kindness, compassion, these are all godly qualities, and the more we cherish them in our hearts, the nearer we are to God. But if we put people before God, then they don't serve the purpose. And the way to cherish these qualities is not to be morbidly attached to the particular objects of those feelings. That is, our friends and relatives, the objects of our love. It is, of course, human to love our relations and friends, but to transcend such narrow love is divine. We must always keep in mind that we are spiritual aspirants. We want to become one in God. So, the scriptures, the ideal that our scriptures hold before us, is not simply a human ideal of love, it is a divine ideal. Let us ask ourselves, we know the story of the Ramayana, we know the story of Buddha. No man, no husband ever loved his wife more than Rama loved Sita. But don't we see a certain detachment in Rama's love of Sita? Did Buddha not transcend his human love of Yashodhara and Rahula and leave home? And did he not afterwards take them into his fold in heavenly love? This is what we usually miss, and this is what we have to learn from their lives. So, detachment does not mean the sacrifice of our affections. What it means is their purification and expansion. I'd now like to bring this class to a close with a particularly thrilling passage from Swami Vivekananda. It is from his lecture on bhakti or devotion. Please listen attentively, because here Swamiji shows the difference between love and selfishness and the relationship between love and detachment. I repeat, Swamiji shows the difference between love and selfishness and the relationship between love and detachment. He says, sufficient unto the lover is the ideal of love. Is it not self-evident that this universe is but a manifestation of love? What is it that makes atoms unite with atoms, molecules with molecules? What is it that causes planets to fly toward each other? What is it that attracts man to man, man to woman, woman to man, animals to animals, drawing the whole universe, as it were, toward one center? It is what is called love. Its manifestation is from the lowest atom to the highest being. Omnipresent, all-pervading is this love. What manifests itself as attraction in the sentient and the insentient, in the particular and in the universal, is the love of God. It is the one motive power that is in the universe. Under the impetus of that love, Christ gives his life for humanity, Buddha even for an animal, the mother for the child, the husband for the wife. This is the one motive power in the universe. Unattached, yet shining in everything, is love, the motive power of the universe, without which this universe would fall to pieces in a moment, and this love is God. None ever loves anything except for the self that is in it. Swamiji means the higher self, the Atma. None ever loves anything except for the self that is in it. Even this selfishness, which is so much condemned, is but a manifestation of that same love. Stand aside from this play, don't mix in it, but see this wonderful panorama this grand drama played scene after scene, and hear this wonderful harmony. All are the manifestations of the same love, even in selfishness. That self will multiply, grow and grow. That one self, one man, will become two selves when he gets married, several when he gets children. And thus he grows until he feels the whole world as his self, the whole universe as his self. He expands into one mass of universal love, infinite love, the love that is God. Thank you. I only want you to please read the entire lecture. The title of the lecture is Bhakti or Devotion, and it occurs in the second volume of Swamiji's complete works. Thank you all.